My name is Travis McLeod. I'm CEO of the Centre for Policy Development, and I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne. And I'd like to pay our collective respects to the elders of the past and the present of all the lands we're joining this event from, and offer a very warm welcome to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. As many of you will know, CPD's Starting Better report was released late last year, late November. The report was very positively received and endorsed by a range of organisations across government, by early childhood providers and peak bodies, by business, by unions and philanthropy. And it was this strong support that to us indicated that a guarantee for young children and families is a unifying concept. It's a promise that all Australians can get behind. Many of you, who I can see on the screen, encouraged us in briefings and reactions and endorsements to the report to launch it formally. And I want to thank the Parliamentary Friends of Early Childhood for agreeing to host this launch. Naturally, we were very excited about the prospect of doing it in person at Parliament House in Canberra today, but for obvious reasons, we have settled on the screen. We know a lot has happened since November last year. The Omicron wave has seen hundreds of early childhood centres across the country temporarily closed, and the sector has come under unprecedented pressure. Early childhood educators and maternal and child health nurses are among those bearing a monumental strain. And we know the events in recent months, and indeed across the last 2 years of the pandemic, have impacted people here today in many ways. And we'd like to acknowledge, first and foremost, the work, the passion and the dedication of people across the early childhood sector. Starting Better, as you know, is a CPD report, but it's one that draws on the insights from our Early Childhood Development Council. And it's this informal intergovernmental group that includes public officials from all jurisdictions, clinicians, educators, unions, philanthropists, First Nations groups and industry leaders. It's met 4 times in about 18 months. It meets again tomorrow. And it's been additionally shaped, Starting Better, by many others we've consulted with over the past 18 months. And I'd like to thank everyone who has been a part of that and who has contributed their time, their insights, their frank feedback, and we really do appreciate it. Starting Better proposes a nationwide guarantee for all young children and families in Australia, a new entitlement and pillar of Australia's social deal. The report charts and costs a decade of reforms at all levels of government, setting out a roadmap to deliver this guarantee by 2030. In a moment, I'll ask National Children's Commissioner Anne Hollands to formally launch Starting Better. And we'll then have a short video and some guest appearances before a panel discussion about why the guarantee is one of the smartest investments Australia can make as we recover from the pandemic. Just a quick note before we get started, which is to say that we are recording the launch until the end of the panel discussion. We'll then stop recording so that the Q&A after the panel discussion can take place under the Chatham House rule with no attribution. Questions and comments can be submitted via the chat function or by raising your hands so you can be called on. So let's dive straight in, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Anne Hollands, the National Children's Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission and a treasured member of CPD's Early Childhood Development Council. Anne, over to you.
Thank you so much, Travis, for what a lovely warm welcome. And hello, everybody. I'm joining you today from the lands of the Camaragal people of the Eora Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and, of course, present, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us here today. Thank you to the Parliamentary Friends of Early Childhood for hosting this virtual launch. And thank you to the Centre for Policy Development for inviting me to share a few reflections by way of launching the report. There is an enormous community of interest and commitment to ensuring all children have the best start in life. Many are represented here at this launch of this landmark report, Starting Better. from the early childhood sector to philanthropy, business, academia, education, and from government. Later, as Travis said, we're going to hear from some of the experts and leaders about the task ahead for us to make Australia the best place in the world to be a child and then the best place to raise a child. This launch is happening at a critical high-stakes moment. After 2 years of COVID, we are reflecting on what we have learnt about the role of government, about the place of children in public policy, what we have learnt about child wellbeing, and what we need to do next. As we head into this election year, we are keenly aware that there have been mistakes made and that we need to build on what we have learnt to ensure not only that we address the wellbeing and development needs of children in the next pandemic, but that we do so every single day. As we know, we had many systemic problems before the pandemic, which COVID has amplified. This includes seriously inadequate mental health services, especially for children under 12 and their families. Inadequacies in the basic living conditions of too many children and their families, including a lack of secure housing, which we know is a key factor in children being removed from their families. And a fragmented early childhood education system not fit for purpose for children and their families. As we all know, there is a massive weight of evidence from decades of research which shows that shifting our investment upstream and earlier in life will save on human and economic costs later on. Yet despite all our best efforts, we still continue to pay more for late reaction policies, ambulances at the bottom of the cliff. We still tolerate locking up children from the age of 10 when the evidence shows that this does not stop crime and that these children are the ones most in need of our care and our support. And we tolerate the fact that disproportionately it's First Nations children that we're more often locking up or removing from their families. Australia ranks a low 32nd out of 38 OECD countries on child wellbeing. That is why the evidence and the roadmap provided by the Starting Better report is so critical right now. It's about reforming the early childhood education and care system, but it's not just that. It's also about all the other aspects of policy that have been shown around the world to promote child wellbeing and development from the start of life, including support for parents, such as equal and more paid parental leave. The various elements in the report of social and economic policy have been in place in many other countries for many years. Australia lags the world, and it's time for change. COVID disruption has made possible the unimaginable. This has included a reimagining of the role of government, including increasing income support and making childcare free, albeit temporarily. Increased funding for mental health services and extra financial support for business have become the new norm. But we're still not making children a national policy priority. I've been arguing that the unique needs of children have been overlooked and policy has been dominated by the concerns of adults. No one in leadership has denied this. We've already seen some of the negative outcomes of COVID restrictions on children, including increases in very serious mental health problems and at much younger ages than seen before. COVID has amplified disadvantage and lack of basics such as affordable housing. The full story of the complex layers of COVID impacts on children will not be told for some time. And of course, we know that adverse childhood experiences can have lifelong effects. The opportunity now is to seize the evidence, the roadmap, and the inspiration provided by the Starting Better report to both build consensus in the community about the need for change and importantly, to start to address the barriers within government that make it hard to implement the evidence and to shift investment upstream. We need to stop tinkering and embrace the bold vision for early childhood development and to create national cross-portfolio leadership with accountability for the well-being of children. Congratulations to everyone involved in starting better. The best way for me to finish up is to quote the Starting Better report itself with a statement I agree with absolutely. Raising children is the most important thing we do, not just as families, but as a society. It's an act of love and faith in the future. Whether or not we are parents, we share a duty to care for children. We must do all we can to help them grow and flourish. Thanks again, and well done, Centre for Policy Development, and thank you very much for inviting me to launch the report today.
Well, thank you very much, Anne, from all of us for those very insightful and poignant remarks, and for your participation in our council and work as National Children's Commissioner. Thank you. So we now have a short video, and so you can all hear it properly. Just like to remind everyone to have their cameras or their screens on mute, and that way you can all hear it without interruption. Thank you. Okay, Georgia, I think we're ready for the video.
If I was Prime Minister for a day, I would give every child a lolly.
When I grow up, I want to be a dad.
If I was a mum or dad, I would want children to be happy.
If I was a dad, I would give children lollies.
Imagine what it would take
To make Australia
the best place to be a child
and raise one.
If you haven't noticed,
The last few years
have been pretty hard. Kids have felt it. Parents have felt it. And so have the people who help us grow up.
This is a big deal.
The brain science says if you have a good start to life, it will help you grow happy, strong and smart. But sometimes
The right preschool costs too much.
or maybe the right doctor is too hard to find.
If you look around the world, our country is not doing very well.
Lots of kids in Australia start school without the tools they need. Starting better shows us what we need to do.
We need to promise kids.
Mums and dads get time off work to look after babies up to a whole year. All kids can get 3 days a week of free care or preschool without any money. Everyone can go to preschool.
For 2 years before you start school.
It's easy to see a doctor or nurse to check how you're growing. Going to primary school is easy and you already know your teacher. And some families who need more help can get it too.
Let's put kids first and help our families and teachers.
Carers and nurses. If we start now, we can get it done in 10 years. We want Australia to be the best place ever to be a kid. And we want our leaders to feel the same way. So we'll be the stars?
You're going to be the stars!
Yay!
Yes.
So we'll be able to make our very own movie, the report about news.
A report on the news indeed. Thank you for that. And our thanks in particular to Freddie, to Finn and to Izzy for being the voices of that video explainer. So in the Zoom room this afternoon, we're very fortunate to have representatives from organisations who endorsed Starting Better and the Guarantee. And those groups include the Business Council of Australia, Chief Executive Women, Raw Far West, Early Childhood Australia, the United Workers Union, and many others, but in particular, 3 Australian philanthropic foundations who are among the biggest investors in the early years: the Numeracy Foundation, the Ian Potter Foundation, and the Paul Ramsay Foundation. And before we introduce a panel discussion, which Leslie Loper will moderate, I'd just like to call on a few representatives from those organisations to say a little bit about why they believe in Starting Better and the proposed guarantee. And I might start, if it's okay, with Glyn Davis from the Paul Ramsay Foundation. Glyn, are you there?
I am. I'm just trying to unmute.
Done that perfectly.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. That was a wonderful video, and I thought it captured beautifully the aspirations of the report. I come to you from the Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nations and pay respects to elders past and present. I'll be very brief. This is an important report because this is, as you rightly said, the most important issue, and Anne, I think, has just underlined that very effectively. One of the conversations that people who are concerned about this area have been having for a number of years, and I talked about this just last week, and I also talked to the CDP chair, Terry Moore, on the same issue, is that whatever the intention of governments, the absence of machinery that effectively meets the aspirations of young people or of their families for them is profound, and the things that make government good at some forms of service delivery aren't necessarily strong in this area. We have to look there for sort of models such as we're seeing in the Starting Better report. And I think that's why this is so powerful, the idea of centering this outside government and community and finding ways of integrating organisations, schools, early childhood services, families. This is the core of it, and it does make it distinctively different from traditional solutions. So I join with others in celebrating this report and expressing delight that it's being launched here this afternoon, and in thanking the Centre for Policy Development for taking the leadership to make this possible.
Thank you very much, Glyn. Very, very kind and insightful as always. I'd now like to ask Nicola Forrest from the Numeracy Foundation to offer her own thoughts about the report and the proposed guarantee. Nicola?
Hello, thank you, Travis, and thank you, Glyn. Nice to see you and everyone on the screen. And Anne, terrific introduction and launch of this brilliant report. I feel very honoured to be sitting amongst all of you for this day, because this is a profound report which has come out at a most timely moment. COVID has stretched all of us and has also given us this opportunity to really project the work that we've all been trying to do. It's shown the cracks, and this report is helping show a way forward. There is no greater measure of how we treat our nation than how we treat our children. And it's page 5 on the report that says you can judge a country by how it treats its children. COVID has created this opportunity, and early childhood has been neglected in public policy. And that's why this report is so important. The early years literally set a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for all of us to make the best opportunity for those children, their families, and our communities and our economy. And thanks to this Starting Better report, the guarantee it proposes and the detailed reform pathway it lays out, we now have a concrete, comprehensive and measurable plan, which no one can argue with. And with an election coming up, I just can't think of a better time. So we must use this opportunity and that it represents and begin the work of this holistic reform with the National Cabinet, an architecture that we already have set up. Thank you, Travis and CPD team, and for all those people that have supported this report. I really look forward to the next few months. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicola and Glyn. And I know there'll be time after the panel discussion for some more endorsers of the report to say a few words if they would like to. But we've got a fantastic panel to discuss some of the meatier recommendations in the report and why they're necessary. And so I want to come to that now. And before I do, just acknowledge the support of the Numeracy Foundation and the Ian Potter Foundation, who have made our early childhood development initiative and this report possible. So thank you very much to those two foundations. You're in for a treat. We now have a panel discussion about the report, And for this, it's my pleasure to hand over to our moderator-in-chief, Leslie Lobel. Leslie's been a policy leader in the United States and Australia for many decades, and CPD is very fortunate to have Leslie as a fellow, but also as the co-chair of our Early Childhood Development Council. Leslie, we're in your hands for the panel, and I'll throw to you now.
Well, thanks, Trav, and welcome and hello to everybody. We're off to a great start. Really fantastic. I can't believe the video includes outtakes as well. So well done, guaranteed to go viral. Let me also acknowledge that I come to you from the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation and pay my respects, join you and everybody else in paying my respects to elders past and present. And I also want to join the chorus line, but an important one in thanking you, Trav, and the CPD team. I have to say the council, which has now, I think, about 40 members and is growing, it's been one of those great partnerships of active dialogue and interaction, and CPD all part of a fantastic initiative here, and credit really to CPD for all of that. Anne is a member and it's kicked us off really well. Now look, this panel, we have 4 excellent panelists here. Let me just give you a sense. I can't possibly cover their bios, but in full, but Professor Tom Kalma, AO, is co-chair of the Australian Literacy and Numeracy Foundation and Chancellor of the University of Canberra. He has served as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner and Race Discrimination Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission. Joining him is Julia Davidson, who has been the CEO of Good Start Early Learning since 2011 and has extensive senior management experience across the health and public sectors in the Australia and the UK, and is a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School. Didn't know that, Julia, well done. So am I, great place. Sarah Hunter is the Managing Director of Officeworks Australia and has held senior leadership roles in the retail, infrastructure and finance sectors in Australia and the United Kingdom as well. So we have terrific opportunity for international perspectives here. And Sam Malston, AO, is the President of Chief Executive Women, Deputy Chair of the Centre for Policy Development. And for those of you who saw the Fairfax papers, has been named by the Premier and Treasurer of New South Wales to chair a women's economic opportunity panel very recently. Her board experience includes roles at Mirvac, Transurban and Citigroup, and it was the first woman appointed as commissioner of the AFL in 2005. So fantastic perspectives. My job is really just to ask a few prompting questions because I know all of these people will have terrific things to say. And I'm going to kick off with Tom. So as you've heard, this report calls for a new plank in Australia's social compact that children getting the best start in life should sit alongside core guarantees like Medicare and free public education and actually be that embedded into our social compact. So Tom, why is it important to ensure that this guarantee is universal and an entitlement available to all Australian families?
Thank you, Leslie, and a great question. I come to you from Canberra on Ngunnawal country and pay respects to elders past and present, and hi fellow panel members and other participants here. Look, it is a good question because we take for granted nowadays Medicare as one of the cores, the fundamentals in relation to health. But we don't have, other than the availability of primary and secondary school being free education, for the public schools. We don't have the same thing for early childhood and early years education. And so that's, I guess, what this report's all about, is saying that, you know, and I should point out that even though we've got an election coming up, this is not party political. This is about having a bipartisan approach. So irrespective of who's in government, they need to look at this report and adopt its findings. It's about, you know, the guarantee. It's about having a fundamental right for everybody to get access. And why do we need that? Well, you know, I think Anne really kicked it off. And gee, that video, if we can't listen to our you know, cohort, who's our target group, on what they have to say, you know, and it was, a lot was covered in that report. But globally, we're ranking very poorly, is one. But when we look at it nationally, we also find that across the nation, there are so many different approaches to early years education and care, and some can get access to it very readily and for free. Other jurisdictions don't have that provision. And so if we look at it from an equity and equality point of view, we need to ensure that, you know, the 20% in the urban areas who can't get access at the moment should be able to get access. But once you get into regional and remote and very remote communities, we're down to 40% of people don't have access to services, or if they do have access, they've got to travel very significant distances to be able to get that. And so what we're proposing in the report is that this has got to be not only looking at it from the early years, we've got to look at those other determinants that impact on people's ability to be able to participate. Having a program is one thing, having people's ability to participate is the other. And that's why, you know, we make the call for paid parental leave, because as has been pointed out, it's those first 1,000 days, you know, the up to 3 years when the majority of brain development is taking place. And so we need to have that ability to interact and not have parents having to go to work to be able to support the family, or living in environments where you don't have a conducive housing or other support, including, you know, early access to health. I think, you know, this report talks about the fundamentals that we need to get to, but I think it should be also read in conjunction with the work that's been going on with the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Early Childhood Strategy that was led by Snake, and that also and a whole cohort of other players out there to see how what is impacting on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and the report offers up so many good solutions as well and practical advice on how it can be achieved. And a lot of that's very much transferable onto the general population. And so we should learn from each other in our collective experiences. In saying that, and there's already been mentioned the role of philanthropy and organisations, and I wanted to just sort of close off on one example that you know, I believe is a good practice model that has the potential to be replicated nationally. The Australian Literacy and Numeracy Foundation that I co-chair, we rely on philanthropy with a little bit of government support, but we've had some really big projects, and one of the ones, and this is what's important, is that it's about a partnership, having the fundamentals right, but then the partnership that has to work. And it's in a very remote community in the APY lands called Indulkana, and it's where the government has put into place an early childhood and care centre within the community. The good thing about it, it's a family centre, is that it's co-located across the road from the preschool and the primary school. And so it's getting the whole transition and the ability for family and community to see the relationship between the two. And that's worked you know, very successfully through our efforts. We ALNF does a lot of the education work in there, working with parents and the community, as well as with the teachers and those little ones, which is important. But which is the other plank, the third plank of it, is the support that we're getting, you know, from a philanthropist. And I'll mention, I see Sarah up there. She wasn't aware I was going to say this, but Officeworks have been working closely with us, as they do with other some of our other philanthropic partners, to provide the books and the early teaching materials that happen that are needed in the community. These are the sort of things that it's great that philanthropy is involved, but they should be fundamental to government. If we are going to see, you know, a transition onto schooling and the best development. And I guess the third part is the community and how we're seeing good outcomes. There's quite a number of examples I could draw where you've got these tripartite relationships that are achieving success. But if we want to be able to do what the Prime Minister's encouraging us to do, and that is to look at developing at our university level, you know, our own scientists, our relationship with commerce and so forth, that doesn't just happen at the university level. That's got to happen in the early years before people go to schooling and all the way through the schooling system, so they get to university, you know, at the end of the day. So you know, very much encourage people to look at this report. It's not a big report, but it's a very insightful report, and it does, and particularly for politicians, you know, from all sides, it gives you the opportunity to again look at the way that we can invest, and not only just as an election promise, but something that's going to have a bit of longevity to it. We're talking about a 10-year strategy at least, and continual funding if we're going to reach the goal of 2030, to have that you know, foundations in place, and so that they become sustainable, and that's when we'll really reap the benefits. So encourage everybody to have a look at the report, and I think that's the reason why, you know, I'm so passionate, and our team are so passionate in wanting to do something now.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Tom. Speaking of philanthropy, I just want to acknowledge that Craig Connolly, the head of the Ian Potter Foundation, has joined us. And Craig, we might be able to swing back to you in a minute. But I might now turn to Julia Davidson. A lot of people talked about COVID in the remarks before the panel. And we certainly have learned an awful lot about ourselves and our communities. Lots of, frankly, quite inspiring things, but also challenging, as a number of people pointed out. One crucial lesson has been just how essential early childhood education and care is. And if we didn't know it before, surely we learned it through COVID, that as ECEC goes, so does the economy and education and community. But we've also learned it's quite fragile. So, Julia, give us a sense of on the ground what this looks like. But also, I know that you are engaged in a lot of discussions around the globe dealing with these sorts of issues. So, also give us your sense of what do you think is really important to ensure that early childhood education and care actually becomes robust and sustainable?
Let me start with COVID, which seems to be all I've been spending many of my days on for so many months and years now. COVID's been quite an interesting natural experiment for our sector. We had the period when early childhood education and care was free, and we have had various periods across the country where access has been restricted by state governments for public health reasons, and we've seen and learnt a number of things from that. The first thing that we've learnt was that during that free period, we saw children who already were eligible for free care coming for more days during the period when it was free for everyone. And what that actually says to me is that there were barriers there through our administrative processes, through the complexity of applying for childcare subsidy, and there were potentially barriers in terms of people not wanting to be seen to be different than other families. So when it became free for everyone, children from some of the more vulnerable families attended for more days, which was absolutely great. The other thing we've seen here in Australia is that we have seen families absolutely wanting to keep their children in early childhood education and care. They've wanted to do that when there have been restrictions during different parts of the pandemic in different states, and they've wanted to do that for two reasons. They've wanted to do it to support their ability to work, which is very, very important for families, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that. But they've also wanted to do it because they understand and they know the difference that early childhood education makes to their children's learning and growth. And we've just heard so many stories from families at Good Start about how when their child has gone back into early childhood education, they've suddenly been able to see the difference in language, the difference in social skills. I know from my colleagues in the UK, Leslie, who I was talking to just the week before last, and this is the government in the UK, who've got much better data than we have in Australia about children's progress, children under 5 and their progress. They can see that children who have spent large periods of time outside of early childhood education and care are behind on their speech and language development, are behind on their physical development, on their fine motor skills, their gross motor skills. They're behind in terms of their social competence, and they're desperately, desperately trying to give children more access so they can catch up. So that's some comments for me on the learnings. But if I can, I'd just like to make a comment about the report, which I just think it is fabulous for there to be a report that recommends access for all children, and I'll say that again, all children, to have access for 3 days of high quality early education and care. And, you know, that is something that I, as someone who's worked in this sector now for 10 years, having come from the health sector, as you said, when you were going through my bio, have felt very, very strongly about that. We restrict which children can and can't have access. And as Freddie and his little friends told us on that video at the beginning, he wants Australia to be the best place to be a kid. And I want Australia to be the best place for all children, not just some children who are able to access education and care. And we know it makes a difference. It's a no-brainer. 1 in 5 children start school developmentally vulnerable, and 2 in 5 children who have not had access to early childhood education and care start school developmentally vulnerable. Other countries get it. It's an obvious public policy thing to do on so many levels, and we just need to catch up. Thanks, Leslie.
No, thanks, Julia. I'm going to follow up with a question, but I'd ask everybody on the call to think a little bit about this, because I hope we'll have time to engage in a discussion. But when I hear you talk about the UK and here, is there a risk that the urgent is going to crowd out the long-term and sustainable?
Well, I think many of us have been talking for years about the need for all children to have access to high quality education and care for enough days for enough years. And we know affordability is a real issue for families. We see that every day on the ground at Good Start. Families who are working full-time get great subsidy here in Australia, but there are many families who only have access to 12 hours education and care a week, and that is not enough to support children's development. So I think this is a conversation that many of us on this call have been having for some time. I think we need to keep focused on the need for a sustainable sector, and I can say a few things about sustainability in a moment. But my focus at the moment is on access. That's a fundamental part of your report, and I think all children deserve to have access for enough days to make a difference, to set them up for not just school, but set them up for life. Thanks, Lizzie.
Fantastic. Look, Sarah, the bio that I read out doesn't do it justice, so I'm going to give a little more, few of us had the opportunity to talk to Sarah a couple of days ago, and it was really just, it filled us with, she was so inspiring. So you bring a lot of very important perspectives to this discussion. You lead a large company with diverse employees and customers, from business to families. And I got to say, I happened to be in Officeworks. I didn't think about it, but I was in Officeworks this morning, and there was a 3-year-old boy just so excited because his mother was buying him some colored pens and paper and things like that. So it's a very diverse employee and customer base. You also sit at the leadership table of one of Australia's most significant conglomerates, really, with international reach and tremendous influence in both public and private sectors. And you're the mother of young children yourself, juggling career and family. And there's probably innumerable other aspects to you, but all of that came through so strongly in our conversation about your passion for this. So I think it's important for those perspectives and your perspective on why this agenda is so important to you. Why is it such a critical priority, not only for Officeworks, but for Australia?
Yeah, look, I think, Leslie, they're great questions, and it is a topic I'm super passionate about, as you and Travers learnt when we got to have a great conversation. And I'd like to acknowledge as well, before we start, that I'm on the lands of the Bunurong people, the Kulin Nation. Pay my respects to Tom and to any other Indigenous people on this call, First Nations people on this call, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. Look, I think, Leslie, as a mum, I always say, when I talk to people and they say, oh, what do you do? When I first had the privilege of meeting the Wesfarmers board and joining Officeworks, I said, well, my number one job is I'm a mum of 2 children. And I'm actually the first managing director of a Wesfarmers business to go on parental leave. So I have a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So for me, I have 2 children in the early childhood education and care environment at the moment, but I come from such a privileged place. I come from a place where I can afford to give them the care that they want, but it doesn't mean that they haven't been impacted by COVID. I totally resonate with the challenges around the impact of COVID to our children over that time, and have seen developmental challenges with my own children. But more broadly than that, and we have a really strong education strategy, a strong relationship with the Smith family, a strong relationship with ALNF, which we treasure. I find it surprising, but I consider it a privilege that our customers, with them, that we've been able to contribute and do so much for our community. So over the last 3 years, we've contributed nearly $7 million to ALNF and the Smith family, and we've supported 25,000 students to have access to literacy and numeracy. But as an Australian, I find it frightening that that's the role we have to play in corporate. We'll do our part. We recognise it's important, but my question is, where is government in this conversation? Because our children are our future. They are the next round of employees, the next round of team members at Officeworks. In Wesfarmers, we employ over 120,000 people. In Officeworks, nearly 10,000. It worries me as a business leader who is responsible for making long-term decisions that are going to deliver a long-term return for shareholders, that it feels like we're not investing in the long term for our children. And then as a business leader who is part of the war for talent, the part of a business community that is trying to find the best possible opportunities to be productive. There's so many reasons why we want female and male or any gender participation in the workforce, and we want full opportunities for that to happen. So paid parental leave for me, I mean, it was the first policy we launched at Officeworks when I joined, was our growing families policy, moving from no secondary carers leave to 2 weeks paid secondary carers leave, moving from 1 month primary carers, or it was maternity leave in those days, to 12 weeks primary carers leave. And paid superannuation for up to 52 weeks of unpaid to close the gap. And the reason we did that was the mental health impact to the parents going through pregnancy was immense. I had a store manager who was the primary breadwinner in her family who was trying to work at 38 weeks pregnant. That was unsafe. It was unsafe for her. It was unsafe for her unborn child. And it certainly wasn't great in terms of that child's development and connection. And she wanted to come back to work at 6 weeks. I couldn't let that happen. So I didn't have any data. I didn't have a policy, but we just got on with it because I knew it wasn't right. So certainly corporate has a responsibility and a role to play in showing leadership in this space because we do benefit from it. I want Officeworks to be an employer of choice. I want people to choose to come and work at Officeworks because we are inclusive, because we will support people. But there is also a safety dimension to this. It is not good for people. I've had 3 children. I can tell you, I would not be productive, healthy or well if I'd come back to work after 8 weeks. So Tom's comments about creating an inclusive environment where people can give of their best and allow that space to be parents and provide that support and care, I think is so important. And then, finally, I think the only thing I'd add, which I'm super passionate about as well, is I just don't understand why we keep ignoring the data and the evidence. This is something Sam and I have talked about before. The evidence and the data over many decades is very clear. My only ask is that we don't end up in a situation where we continue to ignore the evidence and the data around the productivity benefits, around the benefits to the long-term health and development of our country. I love the words on the video, Travers. I'm surprised you didn't roll out my kids for an invite to that one. But, the fact that the aspiration, and we should deliver on it, that Australia is the best place to have a child and raise one. If we change the lens for a second, we're trying to attract global talent to Australia. We are competing globally. And if we can attract people who think Australia is the best place to raise a child, to raise a family, to grow a family, and to make that contribution, we are going to hit our stride coming out of COVID like no other country. At the moment, we're behind the 8 ball on productivity, and it's a huge opportunity. I just hope we don't pass it up.
Well, lots there, Sarah. Thank you for that. Sam, I'm going to turn to you. You've worked across government and both private and community sectors, and there's an awful lot of experience and perspective in that, and your kit bag definitely includes a lot of levers for change. Now, Sarah just said, we just got on with it. And, why isn't the evidence, shifting the dial? Others have said it's the smartest investment Australia could make, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to leave it to you, Sam, to help us navigate this. What's holding us back?
Thank you.
Why is this so hard, and what do we need to do?
Yeah, and thank you, Leslie, and thank you for your leadership. I should acknowledge that Leslie is also one of the members of the panel that was announced by the New South Wales Treasurer today, and was the obvious choice to lead the panel's work on early childhood education and care as part of our panel's work. So I wanted to acknowledge and thank you, Leslie, for that further commitment. I'm joining you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney, and also join others in paying my respects to elders past and present, and to all First Nations people on the call, and the work that so many First Nations leaders have put to this issue, and just listening to Tom, I was particularly taken by a number of your comments, Tom. So wonderful to see you here tonight. To your question, Leslie, I think the answer lies within the report itself, and with the group assembled here, and the groups that came to produce such a remarkable report that has such clarity about it. I think we've got to keep on thinking about the role of grand coalitions. This is a grand coalition effort. I saw this at work in a different context last year, and a number of people on this call were part of it as well. But when at Chief Executive Women we wanted to put a a case to government, to the Treasurer, particularly the Federal Treasurer, about investment in last year's budget into the things that really matter for the future, particularly in COVID. Ordinarily, I think we'd all go to our normal lobbying efforts and do that. But last year, along with the Business Council of Australia, the ACTU, the Parenthood, I can see Georgie Dent here tonight, Good Start, and then Wendy McCarthy, we all just put down our normal strain and our normal fights with each other about ideology or where we started from, and all thought about where we were heading. And we were able to put a pre-budget submission together with a grand coalition of people who wanted the same outcome. In that case, it was about gender equality at the centre of the budget, and had a great piece also about early childhood education and care as part of that, together with paid parental leave and other aspects. But I think this is the hallmark of how work can get done now. It's grand coalitions where every participant is there with a stake in the outcome, but brings incredible credibility and evidence base to the discussion, and puts aside any of the preconceptions or preconceived notions of the other. And so once you're in that grand coalition, you're in it for all the right reasons. And I think if you look at the coalition that came together for this report, it has such breadth. It has officials, it has advisors, it has members of governments, previous members of government, it has experts, it has, and you're all here. And the work that was done through the Early Childhood Development Council that you led, Leslie, was actually showing the way in which good policy development could occur, and Trav and the team at CPD live by that credo about these grand coalitions of people who don't normally come together, but when they do, they have a position and hold to that position. And I think the recommendations themselves speak to what happens when you trust in the coalitions, and people laying down any ideology or other things that divide us and actually put everything into the ambition. And I see it mostly in the guarantee, in the way the guarantee is delivered on a sequence of reforms, and every component is placed in its place. It's not put up as an ask that can be dealt with by the federal government or a national cabinet tomorrow or in an upcoming election. It looks out to 10 years and then sequences all of the events that must happen. So it has a degree of absolute believability about it, because it's not a fast fix-all solution that leaves people behind. So I think the scope and the ambition, and then the sequencing and the bringing together of all aspects that we've heard this afternoon is really where the solution and where the work to be done to get things done happens. This is clearly this will clearly need to be accepted by those that we promote it to, with the same generosity of spirit and engagement with which it was created. And so I think that's also about the language in which it's brought forward to those that need to understand it. Of course, it should be a national cabinet priority. Of course it should. It's a whole of government matter. Everything that has been spoken about this afternoon is about the whole country, the national cabinet, every state government, every territory government being part of this. And so what it speaks to is, and as we've seen tonight, it speaks to the fact that change only happens when all parts of the society come together with the same voice on the issue. And we've heard that tonight from business and private sector, the role of state governments, the role of the federal government and cabinet, civil society, philanthropy. And this document has just got to stay the course and not suddenly turn into something that an individual part of the work to get us here suddenly decides is a faster or quicker way, because the report and the blueprint is inherent in the material we're looking at tonight. So I think we've got to keep on conveying the message with a purpose and a set of values that brought about the report itself. This is central to the future of the country. Joe Biden put it in his address to Congress when he first gave out his first address to the nation in the US about children and young people being the future competitive advantage. It's a horrible way to think of children, but it's a way of thinking about the fact that this is an investment that Australia can and should make. And I'm really drawn to the work and the insights that John Menadue, who was the founder of CPD, shared with us on another roundtable some time ago, when he was asked about what were the learnings of how Medicare got done, one of the most complex, difficult reform moments in Australia's history. And he made the point, it took a decade. It wasn't done overnight. And the most important thing, I think he said to us at the time, which I think you are doing as part of this report, is you must be purposeful and have clarity around what it is we're asking for and to which audience. And that audience is the Australian public. So you have to look above and across all of the divisions and things that go on in the short term and make sure this message in this report continues to be championed by everyone involved in it in the same language with the same intent to the broader Australian community, who then can build a sense of their agency and their involvement in this for their children and their families. So it's staying the course. It's actually trusting that the sequencing and the brilliance of the document anticipates that none of this can be done fast. And the coalition that we've brought together to do this remains a coalition that remains whole and works with one another to find those unique moments to make this a priority for those that can make the change, and then acknowledge those that do along the way. But this is much bigger than anything we're facing into in the short-term nature of elections or individual ministers. This is about your grand coalitions bringing about a grand response that the Australian public will want to demand, because the report speaks to that so clearly. That's sort of a fairly prosaic way of answering your question, Leslie, but I don't think change happens any other way. And we've got to respect everyone who was involved in this, and that many of the officials who were involved, many of the people involved in government, put aside things that would normally restrain them in the private sessions to give their best possible advice to get to this report. We should acknowledge that and say that people really played that role magnificently along the way. And now the tough stuff of selling and remaining consistent and taking this out as a vision for the country is key.
Well, thanks, Sam. Hardly prosaic, inspiring. Let me just take your last comment, grand coalition, grand response, and acknowledge that I've been receiving a number of messages via chat that there are a lot of people who came before us, and hopefully many more who will come after this. But one of them that I would love to call on now is Fiona Stanley. As former Australian of the Year, has brought this agenda to the forefront many times and in a very powerful way. So I wonder, Fiona, could I get you to offer any comments or insights that you like?
Thank you.
Can I just signal, I also have a message from Georgie Denton, the Parenthood, and Sam Page. So, and there's possibly others, but Fiona.
Oh, thank you so much, and warmest congratulations on this. And I hate to say things like, we have known about this for a long time, and we did certainly know about it before COVID. In fact, in 1903, on an infant health clinic in Subiaco, there's a little plaque that said, "The health of mother and child is the most important investment of the state." And then, as you said, in 2003, and Sam, we did convert children into economic widgets to convince John Howard that investment in early childhood was a cost-effective thing to do. But I think that I wanted to really find out more about protecting this initiative against the frailty of previous endeavours, because I am I'm not angry, but I am anxious and wanting this to happen so much for this country. You have outlined, all of you, Sarah, Sam, you, Leslie, have outlined, and Tom, have outlined all the reasons why this is the most effective investment that we can make for almost every single outcome that we are wanting to achieve in this nation. And I think Tom's point about, this isn't just about services. This is about the pathways into children's success and into community participation and social participation. So that's why we have got to think about what that actually means. And the most disastrous thing that happened in terms of SNAKE and the federal government in the last 5 years was the defunding of the 80 Aboriginal controlled early childhood services across the nation, which were much, much more than an early childhood service. They were culturally sound, they provided language, they provided employment, they provided artworks for the mothers, and they were incredibly successful in getting children ready for school, as judged by the Australian Early Development Index, as we called it then, now we call it the census. So, and that means then that we've got to think of different strategies for different populations. And Aboriginal leadership, as was shown in the first part of the COVID pandemic, was outstanding in its success of making the First Nations the best in the world. It's now gone a bit off because of the difficulties with vaccination. So Aboriginal leadership for those organisations is absolutely key, because they know exactly what to do. So there's got to be a tailor-made kind of approach to this, and that's where this whole of government idea comes in, about these complex pathways that Tom mentioned come in. And it is very important, I think, that Sarah was talking about business, and everyone's been talking about business being involved, and that's why this wonderful coalition, these grand coalitions, are so important, because business is so important in influencing political thought in Australia. The 4 companies, or the 4 areas of business which influence child and youth outcomes, are the fossil fuel industry, the sugar fast food industry, the tobacco industry, and the alcohol industry. We have got to be more powerful than these guys in influencing political solutions to what we want for this early childhood agenda, because it is so vital for our future. And a lot of our indicators, I don't want to be too negative, but I am so, I guess, still angry about this, but so many of our indicators are going the wrong way. And so it's very, very important that we turn this juggernaut of just depending on financial bottom lines and turn that juggernaut into what's going to make us have stronger communities. I love the fact that you're calling it investment and not a cost. I love the fact that you've costed out the long-term benefits. And that's one of the challenges, of course, is that we have to make this a long-term, whole-of-government, bipartisan, federation. I think often, I agree with Tom, federation can really get in the way of things like health and welfare and so on. But what COVID did was to show how frail privatisation of essential services was, and how brilliant it was when you put in free childcare and when you got rid of some of these privatising. How could you make money out of something like aged care without actually going, round the corners and cutting corners? And the same with childcare. But childcare is so much more than just a service. It's understanding these pathways, and I think that has to be very important. But COVID really taught us so much, and we should not ignore those lessons. So I'm really, really so excited about this, but I'm also cynical, I guess, a bit, and full of trepidation, because we don't want this to go off the rails again. I think, I really think there's anything we can do to really engage. And as I said, business is so important. Tom, your voice is so important. We now have an Aboriginal leadership that is absolutely outstanding. We have Aboriginal scholars and childcare workers and Aboriginal health workers and so on, who are just an outstanding workforce. So there's no excuse of not having an Aboriginal controlled early childhood centres, which is actually much more than that. The one-stop shop idea that Tom was talking about should be available across all communities. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk, and I apologise for being late.
Well, those were terrific comments, and as I acknowledge your entire career and your leadership in bringing these issues to the fore has been so important. Look, colleagues, I think you have a taste of what it's like trying to chair a council, because there's so many great ideas and energy, and then I have to get a bit hardline, unfortunately, because we don't want to overstay our welcome. As I said, Georgie and Sam indicated in a text that they would like to speak. Can I both, though, say to you a bit unfairly, but we are going to wrap this up by 5:45. So can I really would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Leslie. Well, I will jump in and I will heed your message and keep my comments very short. Yeah, look, I am the executive director of an organisation called the Parenthood. We are a not-for-profit advocacy organisation representing parents and carers around Australia. Our mission is to make Australia the best place in the world to be a parent. And the reason for that is that it is when parents and carers are supported that children can thrive. What I believe is so fantastic about this blueprint is that it really acknowledges how inextricably linked the connection between a parent's health and well-being is with the child's health and well-being. So we can't say that we're a nation that cares about children if we don't also invest in the people who are caring and educating and looking after and raising our children. And I think that The Parenthood is so proud to be part of this council, and we were so heartened to read this guarantee because it really acknowledges that. It says that the importance of paid parental leave is absolutely critical. Sarah, your language around what is healthy, productive and safe, I'm going to add into the language I use because I talk about paid parental leave a lot, and that really does distill what is so important. So I would just like to say congratulations on this blueprint. I am eager to work with the council, with the Centre for Policy Development, to see how we can ensure that this guarantee is implemented, because the hard work has been done. I acknowledge all of the esteemed speakers, and Fiona in particular. I acknowledge how incredibly frustrating it must be, having worked in this space for so long, to be here. I do have some cynicism, but I'm also willing to be enthusiastic and optimistic and say that with the coordination we've got, I think only positive outcomes will come. So thank you for the opportunity to comment, and congratulations to everyone involved in this fantastic blueprint.
Well, thanks, Georgie, and it's been great to have you as part of the council, and I do apologise for the time constraints. Sam is another member of the council, Sam Page, head of Early Childhood Australia. Sam?
Oh, thank you, Leslie, and congratulations to all fellow council members and Travis and the team. I think, we're just delighted to support this report, and we see the guarantee as an ambitious but absolutely achievable pathway to policy outcomes that many of us have been arguing for a very long time. Early Childhood Australia has been advocating for the rights of young children and support for families and children's spaces and children's education for over 80 years. But what feels different now is this coalition of voices and people across different professions and different industry and sector groups coming together. It's nice not to be the only Sam who's out, calling for change, calling for improvements in the way we fund and support early childhood services, and prioritising, as Anne said in the very beginning, the rights and wellbeing of young children. So thank you for allowing me to be part of that, and it's been terrific to be here this afternoon.
Thank you. Look, can I thank everybody who has participated in this segment and